Standing in Marcus Hartwell's corner office, I finally snapped after 18 months of working without a single paycheck. When he smugly asked, "Isn't $9,200 a month enough for you?" I looked him straight in the eye and replied, "What money, sir?" His face drained of all color as my words hung in the air between us. The entire office fell silent outside his glass walls, every employee pretending not to stare. This moment would change everything, exposing the man who hired me as senior marketing coordinator at Hartwell Digital Solutions for exactly what he was. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it could only have been seconds. Marcus's confident smirk vanished completely, replaced by something I had never seen before: pure terror. His hands started trembling as he frantically slammed his laptop shut, sweat beading across his forehead despite the cool October air conditioning. "Annika, I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Let's discuss this privately." But there was no misunderstanding on my part. I had been tracking every single day for exactly 18 months and 12 days since I had received my last paycheck. I could recite the exact date, March 15th of last year, when I got my final direct deposit of $3,837.52 after taxes. I had relocated from Phoenix to Denver for this position, believing every word Marcus spoke during our interview process. He had painted a picture of a growing digital marketing agency with incredible potential for advancement. He promised competitive salary, full health benefits, profit sharing, and unlimited growth opportunities. I had used up my entire savings account of $14,000 to make the move, convinced this was my chance to build something meaningful. "Marcus, I need you to explain to me why my employment records show salary dispersed monthly when I haven't received a single dollar since March," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Through the glass walls, I could see Sarah Chen at her desk, pretending to focus on her computer screen, but clearly listening to every word. David Rodriguez was doing the same thing, typing furiously at nothing, while his ears were practically pressed against the glass. Jessica Williams had already turned her chair completely around to face away from us, but her shoulders were rigid with tension. Marcus wiped his palms on his expensive khaki pants, the same ones he wore every Tuesday like clockwork. "You agreed to deferred compensation during our startup phase. Remember, we discussed this multiple times. That was a complete lie, and we both knew it." I pulled out my phone and opened my voice recording app, something I had started doing for all our meetings after the third month of missed payments. "Marcus, I need my full back pay of $165,600 by tomorrow, or I'm reporting this to the Department of Labor," I said clearly into my phone. His face went from pale to green. "Annika, you're being completely unreasonable. Cash flow in small businesses is complicated. You should understand that by now." But I was beginning to understand something else entirely. For months, I had watched Marcus drive his brand new BMW to work every morning while I took the bus because I couldn't afford car payments. I had seen him post pictures on social media from expensive restaurants while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every single day. I had listened to him talk about his weekend skiing trips to Vail while I couldn't even afford my medication copays. "If cash flow is so tight, how did you afford that new watch?" I asked, pointing to the $1,500 timepiece on his wrist that he had been showing off all week. "That's none of your business," he snapped, but his voice was getting higher with each word. "And how exactly have you been telling our clients that their accounts are being managed? Have you been representing me as a paid employee?" The question hit its mark. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I had my answer without him saying a word. "Get out of my office," he finally managed to say. "I'll be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp for my check," I replied, standing up from the uncomfortable plastic chair that served as his guest seating. "All of it," As I walked toward the door, I heard him mumble something about lawyers and defamation, but his words lacked any real conviction. I had him cornered and he knew it. The walk through the open office felt like a movie scene where everyone freezes in place. Sarah finally looked up and gave me a small supportive nod. David pretended to be on a phone call, but mouthed the words, "Good job," when I passed his desk. I spent that entire night researching employment law wage theft statutes and my rights as a Colorado employee. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Not only was Marcus guilty of wage theft, but the penalties could include criminal charges and treble damages. He could owe me nearly $500,000 if this went to court. But that was just the beginning of what I would uncover about Marcus Hartwell and his business practices. I couldn't sleep that night, so I decided to check my credit report. It was something I did quarterly as a matter of financial responsibility, and everything had always been perfectly clean. My credit score had been 748 the last time I checked in July. What I saw on my laptop screen at 2:30 in the morning made me physically sick. 3 separate business loans had been taken out in my name over the past 8 months. The first was for $32,000 from First National Bank of Colorado. The second was for $28,000 from Rocky Mountain Credit Union. The third and largest was for $27,000 from Denver Business Capital. Total $87,000 in loans I had never applied for, never signed for, and never received a single penny from. Each loan application had been submitted using my social security number, my address, and forged employment verification documents showing an annual salary of $110,400. The income verification letters were on official Hartwell Digital Solutions letterhead and bore Marcus's signature as my supervisor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll through the documents. Someone had stolen my identity to secure nearly $90,000 in funding, and that someone had intimate knowledge of my personal information and employment status. I didn't need a detective to figure out who had done this. I immediately called the fraud departments of all 3 credit agencies and spent the next 4 hours on hold and filing reports. Then I started making copies of everything, saving screenshots, and building a paper trail that would make any prosecutor happy. But first, I needed to know if other employees were dealing with the same nightmare. The next morning, I arrived at work an hour early and waited for Sarah in the parking lot. She drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the front bumper and a cracked windshield that had been that way for months. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said as she got out of her car. "When was the last time you received a paycheck?" She looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone else was in the parking lot. "Annika, I can't talk about this here. How long, Sarah?" Her shoulders slumped. 4 months. I've been living in my car for the past 3 weeks because I got evicted. I've been too ashamed to tell anyone. 4 months. While Marcus had been posting pictures of his vacation to Cabo San Lucas. "David too?" I asked. "David got an eviction notice last month. He's been crashing on his brother's couch, and Jessica quit because of this exact same thing. She's working at that coffee shop on 16th Street now, trying to rebuild her life." We stood in that parking lot, 2 college-educated professionals who had been reduced to poverty by a man who was driving around town in a luxury car paid for with money that should have been in our bank accounts. "Sarah, have you checked your credit report recently?" The look of panic that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know. "Oh God, you think he would—" "I know he did. Check it tonight. And David needs to check his too." That afternoon, while Marcus was out of the office for what he called investor meetings, I used his computer to access the company's financial records. The password was embarrassingly simple, his birthday followed by the word boss. What I found in those files was a masterpiece of criminal deception. Monthly reports to investors showed consistent payroll expenses of $46,000. Detailed breakdowns listed every employee's salary as paid in full and on time. Tax documents showed proper withholdings and Social Security contributions. Everything looked completely legitimate on paper, but none of us had been paid. Marcus had been submitting false payroll reports to the state of Colorado, claiming tax withholdings that were never actually withheld. He had been telling clients that he maintained a full-time staff of experienced professionals. He had been showing investors financial projections based on labor costs that didn't exist. The money that should have gone to employee salaries had been redirected to executive compensation. Marcus's salary had been increased from $90,000 to $150,000 over the past year, with quarterly bonuses of $25,000 each. I was printing out every document I could find when my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "We need to discuss your inappropriate behavior yesterday. Meet me in my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. or consider yourself terminated." I screenshotted the text message and added it to my growing evidence file. By the time I got home that evening, Sarah had called me crying. Her credit report showed $53,000 in fraudulent loans. David texted me from his brother's apartment with a similar story, $41,000 in loans he had never applied for. We were dealing with systematic identity theft, wage theft, and financial fraud on a massive scale. But Marcus Hartwell had made one critical mistake. He had picked the wrong people to victimize. Sarah had a degree in accounting and understood financial crimes better than most law enforcement officers. David's background was in information technology, and he knew how to trace digital evidence and recover deleted files. And I had spent 2 years working for a prosecutor's office in Phoenix before moving into private sector marketing. I knew exactly how to build a criminal case. At midnight, I filed complaints with the Department of Labor, the Colorado Attorney General's Office, the Federal Trade Commission, and the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. I included every document, every screenshot, and every piece of evidence I had collected. Marcus wanted to meet at 8 a.m. I would be there. But I wouldn't be going alone, and I wouldn't be going as his employee. I would be going as the woman who was about to destroy his entire criminal enterprise. I arrived at the office at exactly 7:55 a.m. with a folder containing copies of everything I had discovered. Marcus was waiting in his office, and I could see he had already been there for a while based on the multiple empty coffee cups on his desk. But instead of meeting with him directly, I walked straight to the phone on the reception desk and dialed the number I had found on the company website for Patricia Donnelly, the chairwoman of Hartwell Digital Solutions Board of Directors. "Mrs. Donnelly, this is Annika Peterson from Hartwell Digital Solutions. I need to speak with you immediately about serious financial irregularities involving employee wage theft and identity fraud." Her response was not what I expected. "Miss Peterson, personnel issues should be handled internally through proper channels. I suggest you speak with your supervisor about any concerns you might have." The coldness in her voice was immediate and complete. No surprise, no concern, no request for details. Just a flat dismissal of what should have been alarming allegations. "Mrs. Donnelly, I'm talking about federal crimes. Multiple employees haven't been paid for months, while the company reports show salaries as disbursed. There's also evidence of identity theft for fraudulent loan applications. I'm quite certain you're mistaken about the nature of your employment arrangement. Good day." She hung up before I could say another word. That was when I knew this conspiracy reached far beyond Marcus Hartwell. I spent my lunch break researching the board of directors, and what I found made everything crystal clear. Patricia Donnelly wasn't just the board chairwoman. She was Marcus's former business partner in a consulting firm that had dissolved under suspicious circumstances 3 years earlier. Public records showed she had invested $200,000 in Hartwell Digital Solutions as a silent partner. Robert Chen, listed as the board secretary, was Patricia's brother-in-law and had invested another $150,000 in the company. Linda Martinez, the board treasurer, was Marcus's former college roommate and had provided the initial startup funding of $300,000. These weren't independent board members providing oversight. They were investors with a direct financial interest in the company's profits. I accessed the company's financial reports that had been filed with the state and compared them to what I had found on Marcus's computer. The reports showed the company generating $2.7 million in annual revenue with labor costs of $552,000. Based on those numbers, the company should be highly profitable. But if the real labor costs were zero, because employees weren't being paid, the actual profit margins were astronomical. The board members were receiving dividend payments based on artificially inflated profits created by not paying employee salaries. I found email communications between Marcus and Patricia discussing labor cost optimization and maximizing shareholder returns through efficient resource allocation. In plain English, they were talking about how to steal more money from employees. The most damning email was from Patricia to Marcus, dated just 2 weeks earlier. Continue current compensation structure through Q4. Board extremely pleased with cost management results. Recommend salary adjustments only for essential retention purposes. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were doing it systematically and intentionally. But Marcus had been busy while I was investigating. That afternoon, I received a certified letter at my apartment from Williams Bradley and Associates, a law firm representing Hartwell Digital Solutions. The letter accused me of corporate espionage theft, of proprietary information defamation, and breach of employment contract. According to the letter, I had violated my employment agreement by accessing confidential company information without authorization. They demanded immediate return of all company property and threatened legal action for damages exceeding $100,000. The irony was breathtaking. A company that had stolen my identity and wages was threatening to sue me for exposing their crimes. I called every employment attorney in Denver, but none of them would take my case. Marcus had somehow contacted them first, claiming I was a disgruntled employee making false accusations. Several attorneys mentioned that Hartwell Digital Solutions had retained Williams Bradley and Associates on a significant monthly retainer, making it a conflict of interest for them to represent me. By Thursday of that week, I was completely isolated. My coworkers had stopped talking to me entirely after Marcus held an emergency staff meeting about maintaining confidentiality and company loyalty during difficult times. Sarah wouldn't even make eye contact when I tried to speak with her in the parking lot. David had stopped coming to work altogether. When I drove by his brother's apartment, his car was gone, and a neighbor told me he had left town with no forwarding address. Jessica, who had already quit months earlier, wouldn't return my phone calls. I was fighting this battle completely alone against an organized criminal conspiracy with unlimited legal resources. That's when Marcus made his biggest mistake yet. On Friday afternoon, he called me into his office one final time.
"Annika, I'm going to give you one last chance to make this all go away,"
he said, leaning back in his chair with renewed confidence.
"I'll write you a check for $25,000 as severance pay. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and we pretend none of this ever happened."
$25,000. After stealing $165,600 in wages and $87,000 through identity theft. And if I don't accept your generous offer, then you'll discover that pursuing false accusations against successful businesses can be very expensive for unemployed individuals with damaged reputations. The threat was clear and unmistakable. "I need to think about it over the weekend," I told him. "You have until Monday morning at 9 a.m. I left his office knowing exactly what I was going to do. But it wasn't going to involve accepting his blood money or signing his non-disclosure agreement. It was going to involve finding other people who had been victimized by Marcus Hartwell's criminal enterprise, people who might be willing to fight back if they knew they weren't alone. Because if Marcus had done this to us, he had almost certainly done it to others. And those others might have evidence and resources that I didn't have. Monday morning came earlier than I expected. At 6:15 a.m., someone was pounding on my apartment door hard enough to wake up my neighbors. I looked through the peephole and saw two police officers in uniform, their hands resting on their duty belts.
Denver police, open the door, please.
I opened the door wearing my pajamas and a bathrobe, completely confused about what could possibly be happening. Are you Annika Marie Peterson?
Yes. What's this about? You're under arrest for embezzlement and corporate theft. Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
The handcuffs felt cold against my wrists as Officer Rodriguez read me my rights while Officer Thompson searched my apartment for evidence. They had a warrant signed by Judge Catherine Morrison, authorizing them to seize any computer's financial documents or company property related to Hartwell Digital Solutions. As they led me down the hallway of my apartment building, I could see my neighbors peering out their doors, whispering to each other about the woman in 4B who was apparently a criminal. Mrs. Patterson from across the hall shook her head disapprovingly and quickly closed her door when she saw me looking in her direction. The ride to the Denver Police Department felt like a nightmare sequence where nothing made sense. According to the arrest warrant, Marcus had filed a complaint claiming I had transferred $43,000 from company accounts to personal accounts using unauthorized access to the computer system. The evidence banking records showing deposits to my checking account that I had never made, and computer logs showing access from my employee login credentials during times when I wasn't even in the office. I spent 14 hours in a holding cell before my bail hearing, sharing space with women who were dealing with drug charges and domestic violence cases. None of them understood what embezzlement meant, but they all agreed that stealing from your boss was probably pretty stupid. Bail was set at $50,000, which meant I needed $5,000 in cash to get out. I had exactly $2,312 in my checking account and no family members in Colorado who could help me. I used my one phone call to contact Sarah, hoping she might be able to scrape together the remaining money, but her phone had been disconnected. I tried David's number, but it went straight to voicemail with a message saying his mailbox was full. My public defender was an exhausted-looking woman named Jennifer Walsh, who had 17 other cases that week. She spent exactly 12 minutes with me before the hearing, just long enough to establish that I couldn't afford a private attorney and that I was claiming innocence.
The prosecution has banking records and computer logs, she told me while flipping through a stack of papers. This is going to be a challenging case to defend. I tried to explain about the wage theft and identity theft, but she cut me off. Right now, we need to focus on getting you released so you can help with your own defense. Do you have anyone who can post bail?
I didn't.
I spent another night in jail before a bail bondsman named Eddie Kowalski agreed to post my bond in exchange for the title to my car and the few pieces of jewelry I owned. The terms of my release included surrendering my passport and agreeing not to leave the state of Colorado. When I finally got home Tuesday evening, my apartment had been turned upside down by the police search. My laptop was gone, my phone had been examined and returned, and every financial document I owned had been photographed and cataloged. But the real damage was just beginning. My story had made it into the local news media as a brief mention in the crime blotter section, local marketing professional arrested for embezzlement from Denver Digital Agency. The article included my full name, my address, and the amount of money I was accused of stealing. By Wednesday morning, my story had been picked up by industry blogs and social media accounts focused on corporate crime. Someone had created a LinkedIn post about employees who steal from small businesses during tough economic times using my photograph and personal information. Every marketing firm in Denver had seen the news coverage by Thursday. Job applications I had submitted were withdrawn. Phone interviews were canceled. Networking contacts stopped responding to my emails and LinkedIn messages. Marcus had systematically destroyed my professional reputation using false criminal charges and selective information sharing. He had turned me from a victim into a pariah overnight. My landlord received a copy of my arrest report and served me with an eviction notice citing the criminal activity clause in my lease agreement. My car insurance company raised my rates by 60% due to the increased risk profile associated with criminal behavior. My credit cards were frozen pending investigation of potential fraudulent activity. The stress was destroying my health. I lost 18 pounds in 2 weeks because I couldn't afford groceries and had no appetite anyway. I was having panic attacks every time someone knocked on my door or called my phone. I couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time without waking up in cold sweats. My family in Phoenix started questioning my version of events after they found news articles about my arrest online. My mother asked if I had been living beyond my means and suggested I might need professional help for financial management issues. My father stopped taking my phone calls altogether after my aunt forwarded him a Facebook post about my criminal charges. The few friends I had made in Denver gradually stopped inviting me to social events. When I did see them, conversations became uncomfortable and awkward. People would ask questions like, "Are you sure you didn't just misunderstand your employment arrangement?" Or, "Maybe there's something you're not telling us about what really happened." The isolation was complete and devastating, but the worst part was watching Marcus continue his normal routine as if nothing had happened. He posted pictures on Instagram from expensive restaurants. He bragged about his company's success in local business publications. He was featured in a Denver Business Journal article about innovative entrepreneurs who are reshaping Colorado's digital landscape. Meanwhile, I was shopping at thrift stores and eating peanut butter sandwiches to survive while facing federal criminal charges for crimes I didn't commit. On Friday afternoon of my second week out on bail, I received a letter from the Colorado Department of Labor denying my unemployment benefits claim. The reason termination for misconduct related to theft of employer property. Marcus had contested my unemployment benefits and won. I was sitting in my nearly empty apartment eating generic macaroni and cheese for dinner when I realized I had reached absolute rock bottom. No job, no money, no friends, no family support, criminal charges pending, and an uncertain future that looked increasingly hopeless. That's when I decided to do something that should have been obvious weeks earlier. I was going to find out if Marcus Hartwell had done this to anyone else before me, because if he had, those people might be the only ones who would believe my story and help me fight back. And if he had, there might be a pattern of criminal behavior that would interest law enforcement agencies with more resources than the Denver Police Department. Saturday morning, I walked to the Denver Public Library because I couldn't afford internet service at home anymore. Using their computers, I started researching Marcus Hartwell's employment history and business background. What I found changed everything. Marcus had operated a similar company in Austin, Texas from 2018 to 2020. The business was called Lone Star Digital Marketing, and it had dissolved following multiple complaints filed with the Texas Workforce Commission. I found public records showing 6 separate wage theft complaints filed against Lone Star Digital Marketing between March and August of 2020. The complainants were Amanda Rodriguez, Brian Thompson, Crystal Davis, Michael Johnson, Rachel Kim, and Steven Martinez. All of them had worked for Marcus. All of them had been denied wages for periods ranging from 3 months to over a year. All of them had filed complaints alleging identity theft and fraudulent loan applications. The complaints had been settled out of court in September 2020 with sealed records and non-disclosure agreements. Marcus had moved to Colorado within 30 days of the settlement and incorporated Hartwell Digital Solutions in October 2020. Before Austin, he had operated a company called Pacific Creative Solutions in Sacramento, California from 2016 to 2018. That company had also dissolved following employment complaints, though the California records were more limited. I was looking at a clear pattern of interstate fraud targeting marketing professionals in growing tech markets.
I spent the entire day tracking down contact information for Marcus's former victims, social media profiles, LinkedIn connections, property records, anything that might help me reach people who had been through exactly what I was experiencing. Amanda Rodriguez was living in Houston now, working as a freelance marketing consultant. I found her through her professional website and sent her a carefully worded email explaining that I was dealing with similar issues involving Marcus Hartwell and asking if she would be willing to speak with me confidentially. Her response came back within 2 hours. "Call me immediately. We need to talk." Amanda's story was identical to mine in every detail except the location. Marcus had hired her as senior marketing coordinator for Lone Star Digital Marketing with promises of competitive salary and rapid advancement. He had paid her for the first 4 months, then began making excuses about cash flow problems and temporary setbacks. He used the exact same phrases you described, Amanda told me during our 3-hour phone conversation. Cash flow issues, startup phase, deferred compensation. Word for word identical. Like me, Amanda had discovered fraudulent loan applications in her name, totaling over $60,000. Like me, she had been arrested on false embezzlement charges after confronting Marcus about the wage theft. Like me, she had been systematically isolated and had her professional reputation destroyed. But Amanda, you filed complaints and got a settlement. How did that happen? Because we weren't alone. Once we started talking to each other, we realized Marcus had done this to 6 different people. We coordinated our legal efforts and presented a unified case. She gave me contact information for Brian Thompson and Crystal Davis, the 2 other victims who had been willing to maintain contact after the settlement. Brian was now working in Phoenix for a software company, having relocated to rebuild his career after Marcus destroyed his reputation in Austin. His experience was virtually identical to mine, and Amanda's, including the fraudulent loan applications and false criminal charges. The man is a professional predator, Brian told me. He specifically targets people who are new to a city and don't have strong local support networks. Women and minorities are his preferred victims because he thinks they're less likely to fight back effectively. Crystal was living in Dallas working for a nonprofit organization focused on employment rights advocacy. Her conversation with me was the most enlightening of all. Annika, what you're describing is an organized criminal enterprise. Marcus doesn't do this alone. He has partners who help him set up the fake companies, create false documentation, and provide legal protection when victims start fighting back. She explained how Marcus's pattern worked across multiple states. He would incorporate a business, hire talented professionals with promises of competitive salaries, pay them just long enough to establish credibility, then begin the wage theft while using their identities for fraudulent loans. When employees began complaining, he would file false criminal charges to discredit them and make them unemployable. The stolen wages and loan proceeds would be moved through a network of shell companies before being distributed to his partners. After 18 to 24 months, the business would be dissolved. Marcus would relocate to a different state, and the pattern would begin again with a new company name and new victims. We only got a settlement because we hired Maria Santos, an investigative journalist who specializes in corporate fraud. Her research uncovered the multi-state pattern and attracted federal attention. Maria Santos. I researched her immediately and found dozens of articles about employment fraud, identity theft, and corporate crime. She had exposed similar schemes in Florida, Nevada, and Oregon, leading to multiple federal prosecutions. I sent Maria an email that night explaining my situation and asking if she would be interested in investigating Marcus's current activities in Colorado. Her response came back within hours. I've been waiting for someone to contact me about Hartwell Digital Solutions. Federal investigators have been asking about Marcus Hartwell for months. We need to talk immediately. That phone call lasted until 4 a.m. and changed the entire trajectory of my case. Maria had been building a federal case against Marcus and his associates for over a year.
Her investigation had identified victims in 7 different states and documented a criminal enterprise involving over $2 million in wage theft and identity fraud. Annika, what you've experienced isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a sophisticated criminal operation that has been targeting professional workers across multiple states for over 5 years. She explained that federal prosecutors were building a racketeering case under the RICO Act, treating Marcus's activities as organized crime rather than simple employment disputes. We need your evidence and your testimony to complete the case. But more importantly, we need you to help us gather additional evidence while the investigation is ongoing. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't a criminal. I was a victim of organized crime, and there were people with the resources and expertise to fight back effectively. But Maria's next words brought me back to reality. You need to be prepared for this to get much worse before it gets better. When Marcus realizes he's being investigated at the federal level, he's going to escalate his attacks on everyone who has spoken out against him. I didn't care. After everything I had been through, the prospect of fighting back alongside other victims and federal investigators felt like winning the lottery. What do you need me to do? First, we need to document everything that's happened to you. Every detail, every conversation, every piece of evidence. Second, we need you to help us contact other current and former employees who might have been victimized but haven't come forward yet. I spent the rest of that week working with Maria and federal investigators to build the most comprehensive criminal case of my life. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer fighting alone, and Marcus Hartwell was about to discover that his carefully constructed criminal enterprise had finally attracted the attention of people with more resources and determination than a single broke marketing professional in Denver, Colorado. Maria's first article was published in the Denver Business Journal on a Tuesday morning with the headline, "Federal Investigation Targets Denver Marketing Firm for Multi-State Fraud Scheme." The article detailed Marcus's pattern of wage theft and identity fraud across multiple states, complete with documentation and interviews from victims in Texas, California, and Colorado. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing with a call from Special Agent Rachel Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White Collar Crime Division. Ms. Peterson, we've been building a case against Marcus Hartwell and his associates for 14 months. Your situation in Colorado represents the final piece of evidence we need to move forward with federal charges. Agent Morrison explained that the FBI's investigation had been triggered by reports from the Texas Attorney General's office following the Austin settlement. Federal investigators had been tracking Marcus's activities in Colorado since he incorporated Hartwell Digital Solutions. We've been waiting for current victims to come forward so we could document his ongoing criminal activities. Your evidence provides the real-time documentation we need to prove continuing criminal enterprise. The investigation had uncovered a sophisticated fraud operation involving Marcus and 5 associates across multiple states. The total amount stolen from victims exceeded $400,000 in wages and $800,000 in fraudulent loan proceeds. But the most shocking revelation was the scope of the conspiracy. Patricia Donnelly, the board chairwoman who had dismissed my complaints so coldly, was actually the financial architect of the entire scheme. She had been moving stolen funds through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide the money trail. Robert Chen and Linda Martinez. The other board members were providing false employment verification for fraudulent loan applications and creating fake business documentation to support Marcus's companies. The investigation had also uncovered 2 additional victims in Colorado who had been too afraid to come forward. Jennifer Walsh. A graphic designer had worked for Marcus for 8 months without pay before quitting in frustration. Thomas Rodriguez, a web developer, had been terminated after questioning delayed paychecks and was currently facing false criminal charges similar to mine. Ms. Peterson, we need you to continue working for Hartwell Digital Solutions while wearing a recording device so we can document ongoing criminal conversations. The thought of going back to that office terrified me, but Agent Morrison explained that my cooperation would not only help convict Marcus and his associates, but would also expedite the dismissal of all criminal charges against me. Your arrest was based on fabricated evidence created by the subjects of our investigation. Once we have sufficient recorded evidence of their conspiracy, all charges against you and the other victims will be immediately dropped. I agreed to help with the undercover investigation. That Thursday, I returned to work wearing a small recording device provided by the FBI. Marcus was surprised to see me, but tried to maintain his confident facade. Annika, I'm glad you have decided to be reasonable about our situation. Are you ready to sign the non-disclosure agreement we discussed? I've been thinking about your offer, but I need to understand something first. How exactly are you planning to explain my absence from work to our clients if I sign an NDA and leave quietly? That's not your concern anymore. But it is my concern if I'm going to be signing a legal document. I need to know what story you're planning to tell about why I'm no longer managing their accounts. Marcus fell right into the trap. Over the next 30 minutes, he outlined exactly how he had been misrepresenting employee status to clients, investors, and government agencies. He admitted to falsifying payroll records, creating fake employment verification documents, and using employee identities for unauthorized financial transactions. The recording captured everything in clear detail with no room for alternative interpretation. But Marcus wasn't done incriminating himself. When I asked about Sarah and David, he revealed that he had filed false police reports against both of them as well, claiming they had stolen company equipment when they stopped coming to work. People need to understand that there are consequences for trying to damage my business with false accusations, he said, leaning back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. What about the other employees from your previous companies? Did they face similar consequences? Every business owner has to deal with disgruntled employees who don't understand how small businesses work. Sometimes legal action is necessary to protect your reputation. He was essentially confessing to a pattern of retaliating against fraud victims by filing false criminal charges. The recording session was supposed to last 1 hour, but Marcus kept talking for nearly 3 hours, providing enough evidence to support multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, identity theft conspiracy, and witness intimidation. That afternoon, FBI agents executed simultaneous search warrants at Marcus's home, Patricia Donnelly's office, and the Hartwell Digital Solutions business location. They seized computers, financial records, bank accounts, and business documents spanning the entire conspiracy. Marcus was arrested at his home that evening and charged with 15 federal crimes carrying a potential sentence of 65 years in prison. Patricia, Robert, and Linda were arrested the following morning on conspiracy and money laundering charges. The arrests made front-page news in the Denver Post with the headline, FBI breaks up multi-million-dollar employment fraud ring. The article included my photograph and identified me as a key witness who had helped expose the criminal enterprise. Within 24 hours, prosecutors dropped all criminal charges against me, Jennifer Walsh, and Thomas Rodriguez. Our arrest records were expunged, and we were officially cleared of any wrongdoing. But the legal vindication was just the beginning of my personal recovery. On Friday morning, I received a phone call from David Rodriguez, who had seen the news coverage and immediately called to apologize for abandoning me during the investigation. Annika, I was so scared of Marcus and what he might do that I ran away instead of fighting back. I should have stayed and helped you. Sarah called that afternoon with a similar apology. She had been living in her car and working at a fast food restaurant, too terrified to come forward with her own evidence against Marcus. I kept all of my documentation, all of the emails and text messages, Sarah told me. I was just waiting for someone else to be brave enough to fight back first. Within a week, my phone was ringing constantly with job offers from marketing agencies across Denver. News coverage of my role in exposing the fraud scheme had turned me into something of a celebrity in the local business community. But more importantly, federal asset forfeiture procedures had frozen all of Marcus's business and personal accounts. Victims were going to be compensated for their losses through the seized funds. Agent Morrison estimated that I would receive full restitution within 60 days, including the stolen wages, fraudulent loan amounts, and additional damages for the false criminal charges. For the first time in months, I was able to sleep through the night without waking up in panic attacks. Marcus Hartwell's criminal empire was collapsing, and everyone who had helped him was facing federal prosecution. The man who had destroyed my life was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. Justice was finally within reach. 6 months later, I was sitting in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching Marcus Hartwell get sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The judge ordered him to pay $2.3 million in restitution to victims across multiple states. Patricia Donnelly received 8 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Robert Chen and Linda Martinez each received 5 years for their roles in the fraud scheme. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning of my recovery story. Using the $165,600 I received in restitution, plus an additional $87,000 from the fraudulent loans that were forgiven, I started my own marketing consultancy focused on ethical business practices and employee advocacy. Peterson Marketing Solutions launched 3 months after Marcus's conviction with a mission statement that reflected everything I had learned from my nightmare experience: ethical marketing for ethical businesses with transparent practices and fair employment as our foundation. My first clients were companies that had specifically sought me out because of news coverage about my role in exposing Marcus's fraud scheme. They wanted to work with someone who had demonstrated integrity under extreme pressure and who understood the importance of treating employees fairly. Within 6 months, Peterson Marketing Solutions had grown to 8 employees, including Sarah Chen and David Rodriguez, who I hired as my first full-time staff members. Both of them had been struggling to rebuild their careers after Marcus destroyed their professional reputations. "Annika, working for you feels like what I thought working for Marcus was going to be like," Sarah told me during her first month. "Honest communication, fair compensation, and respect for employees as human beings." David became my technology director and helped develop secure systems to protect both client data and employee information. His experience with Marcus's identity theft tactics made him exceptionally skilled at preventing similar crimes. I also hired Jennifer Walsh, the graphic designer, who had been another one of Marcus's victims in Colorado. Her artistic skills and understanding of what it felt like to be exploited made her perfect for developing marketing materials that emphasized honesty and authenticity. But Peterson Marketing Solutions was about more than just business success. I created an employee assistance fund that provided interest-free loans to staff members facing financial emergencies. I implemented completely transparent salary structures so everyone knew exactly how much their colleagues earned. I required annual audits by independent accounting firms to verify that all employment taxes and benefits were properly handled. Every employee received comprehensive health insurance, retirement contributions, and professional development funding. I never wanted anyone who worked for me to experience the vulnerability and exploitation that Marcus had put us through. The business grew rapidly because clients appreciated working with a company that practiced what it preached about ethical marketing. Our campaigns emphasized authenticity, honesty, and genuine value rather than manipulation and false promises. Within 18 months, we were managing marketing campaigns for 23 businesses across Colorado and had been featured in Inquiry magazine as one of the most innovative small businesses in America.
But my most meaningful work happened outside the business world. I became a regular speaker at universities and professional conferences, educating young people about recognizing workplace fraud and standing up for their employment rights. My presentation, Red Flags and Warning Signs Protecting Yourself from Employment Fraud, had been delivered at over 40 venues across 10 states. The most important lesson I can share with you is this. I would tell audiences, when your employer asks you to work without pay temporarily, that's not a temporary situation. It's the beginning of systematic exploitation, and it will only get worse until you take action to stop it. I also worked with state legislators to strengthen wage theft protections and make it easier for victims to recover stolen wages. The Annika Peterson Employment Protection Act was passed by the Colorado legislature and signed into law, creating stronger penalties for wage theft and providing additional resources for victims. My advocacy work connected me with employment rights organizations across the country. I served on the board of directors for the National Employment Rights Foundation and helped develop training programs for attorneys who represent fraud victims. Through this work, I met Michael Thompson, a federal prosecutor who had specialized in white-collar crime for over 10 years. He had handled cases similar to mine and understood the long-term impact that employment fraud could have on victims' lives. Our professional relationship gradually became personal, and we were married 2 years after Marcus's conviction in a ceremony that included Amanda Rodriguez, Brian Thompson, and Crystal Davis as honored guests. These people who had started as fellow victims had become lifelong friends united by our shared experience and mutual support. Michael and I bought a house in Highlands Ranch, where we could host annual gatherings for fraud victims who wanted to connect with others who understood their experiences. These reunions had become healing opportunities for people who had been isolated and traumatized by employment criminals like Marcus. At our most recent gathering, Sarah announced that she had been accepted to law school and planned to specialize in employment law. David had started his own cybersecurity consulting firm focused on protecting small businesses from financial fraud. Jennifer had opened an art therapy practice for trauma survivors. All of us had transformed our painful experiences into meaningful work that helped protect other people from similar exploitation. But the most powerful moment in my recovery journey came during a victim impact statement I delivered at Marcus's sentencing hearing. Your Honor, Marcus Hartwell didn't just steal money from me and the other victims. He stole our sense of security, our trust in professional relationships, and our belief that hard work would be fairly rewarded. He turned us into financial victims, then into criminal defendants, then into social outcasts. But what Marcus didn't understand is that his attacks on us would ultimately make us stronger, more determined, and more committed to fighting injustice. Every victim who spoke out made it easier for the next victim to come forward. Every piece of evidence we gathered made the case against him stronger. Today, Marcus faces the consequences of his choices. But more importantly, his victims have reclaimed their lives and are using their experiences to protect other people from similar crimes. Sometimes the greatest injustices lead to the most meaningful victories. When we stand up for ourselves and others, we don't just win our own battles. We create change that protects future victims from experiencing what we went through. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Marcus Hartwell's criminal behavior ultimately led to positive changes that reached far beyond his specific victims. Federal investigators used our case to develop better methods for detecting employment fraud. Legislators strengthened worker protections. Business communities became more aware of the warning signs of fraudulent employers. My experience taught me that true strength doesn't come from avoiding difficult situations, but from finding the courage to fight back when everything seems hopeless. When we refuse to accept injustice and work together to expose criminals, we create positive change that extends far beyond our individual circumstances. Peterson Marketing Solutions continues to grow and thrive, now managing campaigns for over 50 businesses and employing 15 people at competitive salaries with comprehensive benefits. Every employee knows their worth, receives fair compensation, and works in an environment built on respect and honesty. Marcus Hartwell is serving his 12-year sentence at FCI Florence in Colorado with no possibility of early release. His criminal conviction ensures that he will never again be able to exploit vulnerable employees or steal from people who trust him. Justice was served, but more importantly, his victims rebuilt their lives and created something better than what we had lost. Have you ever experienced workplace exploitation or witnessed employment fraud? How did you handle the situation, and what advice would you give to others facing similar challenges? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to fight back against workplace criminals. If this story inspired you to stand up for yourself or others facing employment fraud, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about people who refuse to accept injustice. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about the warning signs of employment fraud and the importance of fighting back against workplace exploitation. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter how hopeless your situation might seem, there are always people willing to help you fight for justice. You are stronger than you know, and your voice matters more than you realize.